A woman gets elbowed in the head, and there's no foul called. The woman who speaks up about it gets a $5,000 fine. And the person who approved that fine? It turns out she used to do public relations for the very same team that threw the elbow. Welcome to the WNBA, where holding people responsible seems to vanish faster than a hard foul in the final minutes of a game. This isn't just about a few missed calls on the court. It's about a league that punishes its players, not for breaking the actual rules of the game, but for breaking the unwritten rule of silence. And today, inside a closed-door strategy room at the Indiana Fever's practice facility, that silence is about to be completely shattered. The room is quiet, but the air is boiling with tension. Above, the bright LED lights give off a cold corporate feeling. There are no cameras here, no reporters waiting outside, just hard plastic chairs, bottles of cold water, and the unmistakable feeling of a meeting that nobody wanted to attend. Sophie Cunningham is leaning back in her seat, one ankle resting on her other knee. Her jacket is zipped halfway up, and the fabric is pulled tight across her chest, hiding something that everyone in the room already knows is there. Across from her, Caitlin Clark sits with her knee freshly wrapped in clean white athletic tape. She sits perfectly still, and you can't read anything from her face, but her presence alone says everything. She didn't come here to watch from the sidelines. She came here to choose a side. Opposite them, sitting next to a league official with a face like stone and a veteran referee who looks just as familiar, is the WNBA's disciplinary representative. She folds her hands on the table and offers a small half smile that never reaches her eyes. "So," she says, her voice smooth and coated in a corporate polish. "Sophie's gone viral again, I see." She waits for a response, but gets only silence. She tries again. "I thought the last fine might have taught you something." Still, there is no response from either player. Instead, Sophie leans forward slowly. Her fingers find the zipper at the collar of her jacket. With one clean, deliberate pull, she unzips it. The room seems to hold its breath. The words stretched across the t-shirt on her chest are like a giant billboard that nobody paid for. Hot. Girls eat Arby's. No one in the room laughs. No one even dares to crack a smile. But the message hits them like a brick thrown through a glass office window. And suddenly, this isn't a strategy meeting anymore. It's a standoff. One side came into this room to control a story. The other side came to burn that story to the ground. So that's it. The league representative's voice cut through the tense air. "You wear a joke on your chest. You go on the internet and call our referees stupid, slow, and useless. And you expect us to applaud you for it?" "Not applause," Sophie said, her eyes not blinking for a second. "Just a league that actually calls a flagrant foul when one of its players gets her head bounced around like a pinball." "You are escalating the tension," the rep shot back. "You're undermining the trust in our officials. Your video, your little TikTok tantrum, was a direct violation of our media policy." "Violation?" Sophie leaned forward again. "I got elbowed in the jaw 3 times in 2 games. No whistle was blown. But the problem, apparently, is me saying it out loud. You were out of line. You made our officials look incompetent." "No," Sophie cut in, her voice sharper now. "They did that all by themselves. I just held up the mirror so everyone else could see it too." The referee sitting across the table, a man in a gray suit with a stiff jaw, finally spoke. "If players start calling officials incompetent online," he said, "they invite chaos into the game." "You're not bigger than the system, Cunningham." "No." Sophie's tone turned even colder. "But I'm done being smaller than the silence you've built to protect yourselves. You think the fans respect this circus?" The representative snapped back. "TikTok stunts, cheap shirts, and hashtags. You're not protesting. You're just making money off of people's anger." "I'm making money off of what your carelessness gave me," Sophie said. "You ignored it when Sparks was choking me out at the elbow. You ignored it when Olivia's forearm hit my temple. You ignored what happened to her." She turned her head slowly and looked directly at Caitlin. And now you want to fine me for saying what everyone else in this league is whispering in private. I'm not just speaking for myself anymore. I'm speaking for this whole damn locker room, including her. Caitlin didn't move. Not yet, but something in the way she was sitting shifted. It was the stillness you feel right before an earthquake. The quiet moment before metal strikes flint and a spark ignites. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't a calm quiet. A storm had just walked into the building, and her name had finally been spoken out loud. Caitlin's chair made a small creaking sound as she finally leaned forward. Her movements were slow and exact, like a verdict being read out loud. Her eyes locked onto the referee sitting across the table. She was calm, calculating, and not at all shaken by the tension that was filling the room like smoke. "I took a hit to the knee in the open court," she said, her voice as steady as steel. There were 3 referees on the floor, and not one of them blew a whistle. Her eyes didn't blink. "Do you remember that game?" she asked, still staring directly at him. "Because I do. I remember every frame of it, every single second. I remember limping off the court while the same officials who saw it happen just walked away like it was nothing." No one in the room answered her. The silence in the room tasted like guilt. "I kept quiet," she continued. "Maybe I was too quiet. Because I thought, maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe I would get the call the next time." But then Sophie gets elbowed in the head, twice. Then she gets grabbed by the neck, and there is still nothing. Then she speaks up about it, and you find her $5,000. She turned her attention to the league representative now, her voice still smooth, but getting colder with every word. "That's when I stopped thinking that this was just incompetence." The representative shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I did some checking," Caitlin went on. "It turns out that the person who signed off on Sophie's fine used to be the PR director for the Connecticut Sun from 2019 to 2021, the very same team that has been throwing these elbows. Funny how things come full circle, isn't it? That was the final blow." The league representative stiffened, but she wasn't fast enough to hide her shock. The referee's jaw tensed up, and somewhere across the table, the air in the room seemed to get thinner. Caitlin didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm not here to create conspiracy theories," she said. "But if the league wants to talk to us about having integrity while it is handing out punishments to the people who speak up and protecting the hands that are throwing the elbows, then I've got some questions." She leaned back in her chair again, her eyes still locked on them. "Starting with this one. How many people in this room already knew about that connection and were just hoping that we wouldn't find out?" Nobody spoke. Not the representative, not the referee, not even Sophie. The only thing in the room that was louder than Caitlin's words was the heavy silence that they left behind. A silence that was tight, cold, and sharp enough to cut glass. The league representative straightened her blazer as if she were adjusting a mask that had slipped. Her voice came out much smoother this time, carefully wrapped in legal language and PR polish. "We issue fines based on violations of the league's communication policy," she stated, as if reading from a script. The language used in Ms. Cunningham's post was inflammatory, disrespectful, and damaging to the integrity of the WNBA. There are no exemptions, and there is no favoritism. The rules apply equally to all players. No one is above the code. Across the table, the referee finally leaned in, his voice low and smug, coated with a layer of believable denial. "I reviewed the tape of that game," he said, "and frankly, I don't recall any action that deserves the description Ms. Cunningham provided. If something was missed by another official on the floor, that's regrettable, but I can't be held accountable for others not doing their job." Sophie's eyebrows shot up, then lowered into a straight, angry line. "I got elbowed in the face," she said, her voice rising. "Once by Olivia, once by Jordan, and then again by the same damn teams later. One of them knocked me so hard that my ponytail hit the sideline before the rest of my body did. That footage is public. Millions of people have watched it. You want to talk about damage to the league? The only thing getting damaged out there is us. She turned to the representative now, daring her to look away. But I'm the problem. Because I used a bad word? The representative didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, her voice sharp with fake curiosity. Just for the sake of transparency, Sophie, how much money are you earning from that Arby's shirt you seem to be so proud of? Because if we're going to talk about exploitation, we should be honest about who is profiting from what. A pause. Then the referee added his own twisted comment with a half smile. You know, back in the day, players used to earn their respect. On the floor, not from sandwich endorsements. Sophie let out a single sharp laugh. It was the kind of laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Back in the day, she shot back, refs used to call fouls when someone got body slammed. Caitlin didn't laugh. She remained locked in, completely unmoved. Sophie stood up slowly, still calm. Her voice dropped to something quieter and far more dangerous. You ignored the hits. You ignored the blood. You ignored the bruises. But the minute I post a TikTok, suddenly the lead cares. Not about my safety, not about the play, just about how it looks. She stepped closer to the table. You're not punishing me for what I said. You're punishing me for saying it where people could hear it. The silence returned, and this time it wasn't awkward. It was exposed. Because in that room, the only thing more embarrassing than what had been said was how much of it was true. Sophie didn't back down. She didn't yell. She just smiled, a calm and deliberate smile. It was the kind of smile that made everyone else in the room suddenly realize how weak their authority really was. See, here's the thing, she said. You're worried that I made some money off of that shirt? Fine. I own that. But between making a few bucks from speaking up or making a salary from shutting players down, I know which one of us should be embarrassed. The representative opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Whatever speech she had prepared to give was now useless. Caitlin's voice followed like a sharp knife, slicing cleanly through the air. That shirt, she said, it's not a brand deal. It's a statement. It says what none of us are allowed to say when there's a microphone in front of our face. She turned her eyes to the referee. You didn't call the foul. You didn't protect the player. So Sophie found a way to be louder than your silence. The referee tried to speak, but Sophie was already leaning in again. You want to talk about integrity? Her voice dropped, as sharp as glass. I lost $5,000, and in return, I gained 1.7 million people who all said, finally, someone said it. That's not a fine. That's a campaign. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each of them one by one. You tried to bury the story, and instead, you just fed it and made it stronger. You tried to shut me up, and you gave me a megaphone. You thought that punishing me would make the rest of them stay quiet. It just made them louder. Nobody moved. You keep talking about the lead's image, Sophie said. Well, look around. I am your image now. And for the first time, the representative didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because she knew that anything she said would just sound like a bad punchline to a joke that Sophie had already told much better. What was left was silence. Not the kind of silence that controls a room, but the kind of silence that proves you have completely lost it. Caitlin didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just looked straight at the woman across the table and laid out the math like it was a hammer. Your first fine was $4,000. Sophie went viral. Your second fine was $5,000. She got 700,000 new followers in just 3 days. Her jersey sold out. Brands started lining up to work with her. You call that discipline? Her gaze sharpened. Because from where I'm sitting, that looks more like a marketing strategy than a punishment. The representative shifted in her seat, stammering for the first time. We don't manage social media. That's not under our control. Caitlin leaned in, her elbows on the table, her voice as flat as stone. But social media is managing you. Every fine you give out turns into a press release for the very people you're trying to silence. You are not in control of the story. You are just adding fuel to it, and you are losing." No one interrupted her. "You thought you were setting an example for the other players. What you really did was start a movement. You thought you were protecting the league. What you really did was expose it. Every time you punish someone for being honest, you prove exactly why people have stopped trusting your process." The referee crossed his arms and tried to look like he wasn't bothered, but even he didn't say a word. Sophie sat back in her chair, her arms folded, just watching the representative squirm under the weight of her own failed plan. Caitlin didn't stop. "You have built a system where staying silent is rewarded and telling the truth gets you fined. And then you wonder why players are finding louder and louder ways to speak out." The table held its breath because everyone in that room knew what had just happened. The numbers weren't just data anymore. They were a final judgment. And the only thing louder than 1.7 million new followers was the sound of a league that couldn't explain why it kept punishing the truth and rewarding the chaos that followed. Sophie didn't wait for anyone to give her permission to speak. She leaned forward, planting both of her hands on the table, and locked her eyes on the representative like a laser cutting through all the spin. "You don't find the elbows," she said, her voice sharpening with every word. "You don't find the chokeholds. You don't find the people who are actually causing the damage." She paused just long enough to let the ridiculousness of the situation settle in. "You only find the ones who call it out." She paused again. "You know how broken a system has to be to protect the foul and punish the person who blows the whistle." Caitlin's voice came next low, steady, and deadly. "And while all of that is happening," she said, pulling back her pant leg to show the thick wrap still hugging her injured knee, "the one who is actually getting hurt just sits here, silent, waiting for an apology that never comes and probably never will." She looked up, not at the representative, but directly at the referee. "You watched it happen. You were right there on the floor, and you just walked away." The referee shifted in his seat, his face twitching with a mix of guilt and anger. He stood up. "This is ridiculous. This isn't a courtroom." But before he could finish his sentence, the WNBA representative reached out and put a firm hand on his arm. "Sit down." The room froze. The referee glared at her, his chest puffing up, but she didn't blink. Her grip on his arm didn't loosen, and that was it. Right there in that moment, there was not a single voice defending him, not a single word to justify what he had done or what he had ignored. There was just the quiet collapse of an authority that had finally realized it was completely out of excuses. Across the table, Caitlin and Sophie didn't smile. They didn't have to. The silence said it all for them. This was never just about one call, one foul, or one TikTok video. It was about what happens when a league forgets who it is supposed to protect and who it was just hoping would stay quiet. Caitlin let the silence drag on long enough for every pair of eyes in the room to land back on her. Then she spoke, not with anger, but with a clarity that cut even deeper. "I've got a question." The representative stiffened. No one else moved. "If that TikTok video, the one calling out the bad officiating, the one with the 1.3 million views in an hour, if that had come from me instead of Sophie," she let the weight of the question build, "would you have fined me?" The words didn't need to be shouted. They just hung there in the air, toxic and true. The representative blinked once, but gave no answer. The referee glanced over at the representative, his jaw tight. He was still standing, but suddenly he looked unsure of why. The silence in the room thickened like wet cement. Caitlin didn't flinch, because if the answer is no, she continued, then this isn't about following the rules. It's about who you think you can control without any consequences. Still, there was nothing but silence. She sat back in her chair, her arms folded, her injured knee still visible. Her very presence in that room a reminder of the injury that no one had ever answered for. "Let me help you out," she said quietly. "The difference between me and Sophie isn't the truth. We both said the same thing. The only difference is that you thought you could get away with fining her because she doesn't bring in the ticket sales, the TV ratings, or the pressure from ESPN. The representative opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no safe Fenton she could say, no legal defense she could offer, no PR line that had been rehearsed well enough to survive the truth that Caitlyn had just laid bare. For the first time since the meeting began, no one was pretending anymore, because she hadn't just asked a question. She had delivered a final verdict. Sophie pushed her chair back with a loud screech that cut through the air cleaner than any whistle they had refused to blow. She didn't look at the representative. She didn't need to. Her eyes swept across the entire table one last time. "Go ahead," she said. "Keep fining me. Make it $10,000 next time. Or 20. Hell, throw the whole damn rule book at me." Her voice didn't shake. It just got sharper. "I'll still talk. Because the only thing more dangerous than your silence is you thinking that you can buy ours." She stepped away from the table. No one dared to stop her. Not this time. Behind her, Caitlyn stood up too. She was calmer, quieter, but the weight of her voice hit just as hard. "I used to think that someone like me had to stay quiet," she said. "That if I just played it safe, the system would take care of the rest." She looked toward the representative, not with hate, not with fear, but with a sense of finality. "But I won't let someone else carry the weight of my silence anymore." There were no slamming fists, no dramatic speeches, just two players walking out of the room, their backs straight, their heads held high. Not because they thought they were above the league, but because they had just reminded everyone in that room who the league was supposed to belong to in the first place. No one followed them. No one dared. And in that final stillness, what remained wasn't defiance. It was clarity. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a shift in power. And it had already begun. In that room, no banners were raised, and no side declared a victory. But something undeniable had shifted. Not because someone had shouted the loudest, but because someone had refused to sit down and be quiet. A $5,000 fine was supposed to be a muzzle to keep a player quiet. Instead, it became a matchstick. And the spark that it lit wasn't a press conference or an official press release. It was a simple cotton t-shirt with one line written across the chest: "Hot girls eat Arby's." There were no chants, no crowd, no microphones. But there was Sophie, not apologizing for anything. There was Caitlyn, completely unmoved. And there was a silence that finally cracked, not with noise, but with clarity. Because a protest doesn't always come with a bullhorn. Sometimes it just walks into a boardroom dressed in calm defiance and sharp facts, and it makes the people in power blink. No policies were changed that day. No referee apologized for a missed call. No executive stepped down from their position. But the fans started whispering different questions. The other players started watching more carefully. And behind the closed doors of the league, even the sponsors began to ask, what else is going on that we haven't heard about? So now the league is facing a choice. They can either keep finding the truth, or they can finally start to listen to it. Because if one simple shirt could make them squirm this much, just imagine what comes next, when an entire locker room stops whispering and starts speaking up. And somewhere out there, a quiet question hangs in the air, louder than ever before. Is it time for someone to finally start calling fouls on the people who are holding the whistles?